please.
Oh, right. Welcome, everybody. I think there's some of you still joining. I'm Anne Nichols. I'm chair of the CIPR's Education and Skills Sector Group, and I am delighted to welcome two very, very eminent people to the panel. Before we start, this session will be recorded. If you're in a different time zone or whatever, or wherever, the CIPR will automatically send out a link to the recording to everybody that's registered for the event, so please don't worry. And there will be a blog which will follow. I'm thrilled to introduce Anne Gregory, who is Professor Emeritus of Corporate Communications at the University of Huddersfield. She's also a past president of CIPR and a member of the AI in PR panel. She's authored 4 major research reports on the subject, so she's eminently well qualified to be here today, and she runs her own consultancy and training company, Practice Limited. Stuart Bruce, who'll be joining us shortly, is also a recognised international authority and thinker on the future of public relations, communications and corporate affairs. He's the co-founder and joint MD of a company called Purposeful Relations, the digital transformation consultancy for the PR and communications industry. So straight over to Anne Gregory to introduce the session.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Anne, and hello to everybody. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. I feel as if I'm speaking to my home crowd, being an academic, so very much looking forward to the discussion with you later on as well. I guess for the last 20 years, there's been an explosion in digital technologies and platforms with the rise of social media. Can we believe how old that is now? AI tools now becoming quite ubiquitous in our work. And it seems that the advent of ChatGPT 20 months ago really generated an explosion of our interest and our use of AI tools. And I guess many of you will be already using tools like ChatGPT or Claude or other proprietary applications for things like social media listening already. So this world is now becoming familiar to us all, but it's still quite scary. And the pace of development is absolutely phenomenal, and just keeping in touch is an update is a real challenge. So just a quick word on how Stuart and I have planned the session today, and I'm really pleased to be working with Stuart on this. He really is one of the world experts in looking at the application of AI and generating policies for organizations. So it's a real privilege to be working with him. So I'm going to give you an overview on where we're at and some of the key ethical issues. And this is based really on the work of the AI and PR panel from the CIPR. We've been trying to prepare the profession really for the world of AI. And ethics has been an issue right since we began the panel in 2018. So give you a quick overview of what's happening, and then Stuart's going to come in and drill down into what's involved in developing policy and implementing AI in organizations. And he's got a lot of experience of working in the public sector. So we're going to start the presentation now. Stuart's going to drive the presentation for us so that it's not clunky. So when I say next slide, that's because Stuart is in control of everything. So if we can go immediately on to the next slide, please, Stuart. So that if we're just all on the same page, it helps. So a quick definition then of what we mean by artificial intelligence. And there's a little quote there from IBM. Artificial intelligence is technology that enables computers and digital devices to learn, read, write, create and analyze, and really emulates what human beings can do and our ability to complete tasks. So the key thing about AI is, without going into all the detail about weak and strong AI and machine learning and deep learning, etc., etc., is that it takes a high volume of material, it analyzes it at high speed, and it takes it from a high variety of media, whether that's written or audio or visual media, and it mashes it all together. And it uses in a quotes intelligent unquotes way in order to emulate human activity. So that's what, in a nutshell, what AI does. So next slide, please. So we look at some of the big ethical questions, jumping straight to our topic today. I think it's important really to set a little bit of context. And so we have to understand what AI is doing in society, really, because our profession of education and skills is taking place against a seismic shift of what's happening in the world today and in society itself. And we work in education, and we are preparing young people who are going to shape the society of the future. And therefore, I think it's important to think about what sort of society we're creating and where we're at the moment. If we think about a number of things, AI is really about globalization on the steroids. It's a boundaryless technology, and it's driven by big tech companies. It's not driven by governments, and it's not driven by people. It's driven by big tech companies who want to make money out of this technology. And therefore, society is being, at the moment, shaped to serve the ends of these big tech companies. Fortunately, market pressure is now making them think about the ethics of their own technology. But it's taken a while, and we're already a way down the track. But what that means for people is that they feel out of control in many ways in this world of AI, and they feel that they're being driven and not driving. And that's largely down to a lack of knowledge. There's a lot of hype about AI, and we can control this technology, but it's also a dangerous technology if we don't generate the conversations and really say that really in colleges and universities, those conversations have to be shaped and framed, because we are shaping the society of now and of the future. We know that information is accessible to almost everybody, but the volume of it and the source of veracity of that information is a real challenge to us. And the ethical issues about what we put into that space. And maybe we've got an ethical responsibility to generate much less than what we do, because people are being totally overwhelmed. And a result of this is trust is failing, because people don't know what sources to go to for information. And we know that the sources that they might turn to, like government, for example, levels of trust are at an all-time low in them, not just because of AI, but for a whole other source of reasons. So there is this sense that society, the bonds of society really are beginning to loosen. And I mentioned that information is available for all, but that's not true. We are living in an age of AI apartheid, where those who have access and have knowledge are, if you like, the new elite. And those who are deprived, because maybe they're in countries where there aren't the networks for people to access technology, or where they're of a certain age group where they are not familiar with this technology, are being disenfranchised. And we've got real challenges here. And as educators, I think we've got a duty to address those voices that are not being amplified and make sure that we have inclusive conversations. We know that legislation is going on now. The UN has got its advisory council on AI safety, and we know that there is EU legislation. The US and the UK is proposing in legislation. I've just come off a meeting with the British Standards Institute, actually, where we're beginning to think about standards of AI as an instituted standard here in the UK, dovetailing into international standards, of course. But interesting, they've just come out with the London Declaration, which says that all the stuff around AI now must be massively cognizant of climate change, and the computing power that is required by AI, consuming huge amounts of energy, is a deep concern. Now, and these are things we don't think about really when we're thinking about AI, but they are societal issues. So moving on quickly, Stuart. Just looking at, next slide, please. If we look at the nature of organizations that are being created through AI as well, you know, we're talking about boundaryless organizations. You know, how many of us go into the office to work every day? Some people never see their boss. Some people's work, you know, I had a guy from my alarm company the other day. He never goes into the office. His boss is the AI system that tells him where to go next, and the messages he gets down from his tablet. He never. So, what's the nature of organisation today? And we know in education land, you know, that that the bonds that brought us all together, big lectures, and us coming into work every day. Some academics, anyway, but administrators are coming into work every day. Those bonds are loosening actually. So, what does it mean to be a university or a college these days? And we know that there are differential effects on those of us who work in higher education. For students, for example, you know, we are implementing AI policies now. Some universities, certainly internationally, are still reluctant to engage with some AI tools that allow students to do their work. AI policy for student work is still being worked out by some institutions. We know that they are generating essays from using AI tools, marshalling arguments. Stephen touched on some of that last week, I know, when he did the session with you. We know that the nature of assessments is having to change. For academics, I have to say, you know, summarizing academic papers for me has been an enormous boom. And it's interesting to compare academic abstracts of papers with what AI generated summarizing tools show you is the paper is all about as well. Interesting comparison that. And all, helping to organize our thinking, helping to, as in supervisions, when we can use tools to summarize supervision meetings really quickly and get those back to the students so they know what to do next. Really important tools. We know for administrators as well, you know, data collection analysis using these tools is ubiquitous. Ethical issues there about the transparency of the use of those tools. We know that admission processes are being automated, AI is using. Again, ethical issues about the choices of students and our admissions policies, all being raised by that. But a lot of speed being injected now into some of the routine processes that administrators have to go through, such as statutory returns. Even grant applications can be automated to a certain extent. And there are, you know, issues around institutional governance that AI now is beginning to intrude along. I used to be a non-exec director of a huge health organization, and the pile of documents that I used to get to read for a board meeting was huge. And using AI tools to summarize some of those documents is really important, but also getting AI to interrogate those documents, to seek out the governance questions that I should be asking, and asking governance questions and getting AI to point out, for example, where student voice has been actually listened to when the university has been making decisions. Now all these things are possible. So, and that raises questions for us about what do we do about upskilling the existing workforce, administrators, academics in use of AI tools? And what do we do about the new guard? What do we do about predicting the nature of our workforce for the future and the needs of that workforce 3 years ahead, never mind 10 years ahead? What are we doing about predicting the curriculum that we need to have for students to prepare them for this brave new world? And what are we doing about how decisions are made within universities We know that increasingly, and colleges, we know that increasingly those decisions are being data led. That's the phrase. And that's a phrase that scares me. Data informed, yes, but data led, that's a different ball game with a whole host of ethical issues behind it. I heard the other day that a board has actually appointed an AI agent, a bot, to be chair of its board because it wants to take all the emotion out of decision making and it wants the final say on decisions to be made by an AI agent. That scares me. So please, can I talk to a human being? You know, is a plea that many of us make when we're engaging with some of these agents. So moving on, Stuart, I think some of the issues for us are quite clear. When we look at the pace of change, Stephen showed you this document, this slide, I know, in different form last week. But we know that we've traveled a long way in the last 2 years. If we look at the image there on the left-hand side, our use of AI tools, 2/3 of practitioners not fully adopted AI use in every day yet. And not all of that is about them being refuseniks. Some of that hesitancy of use is about ethical concerns. Where are the guardrails? I don't want to use these tools without understanding what the implications are, what the legal implications are, what the practical implications are, what the accountabilities are for the use of these tools. And also some of the hesitancy in use is around the fact that, and we know that universities or colleges are cash strapped, about the significant investment that's required in AI tools. When is the time to jump in the use of these technologies? ChatGPT-5 coming out any moment now. Do I invest in one set of technologies or in another? Now, looking at the slide on the right-hand side there, we can see that a lot of the use of AI is around content creation. You can see the top 3 most areas of use around content creation. If we could just go to the next slide, Stuart, that was information from PR Week's global survey. This is the information that we gathered from CIPR users and others in a global survey of the tasks that AI is being used for. The work was actually done in September last year, so it's about 8 months old, but there's been no real change since then. This is the range of tasks from data analytics through to helping with partnership development that you are using in your work. And the ones that are most used at the moment is around social media monitoring and data analysis, and media monitoring and media relations. That's what we found. And the least used are around partnership building, which is the last one on the list there, and around providing strategic recommendations for managing crises, which you can see there are 2 areas for crisis management on this list, and it's that second area there. So these are where we're using these tools throughout the CIPR, including in higher education and in colleges. And what we see is that AI is being used very much as an assistant because it does things quicker, or as an augmenter of our work. So it helps us do what we couldn't afford to do or what would take us too much time to do. For example, some of the data analytics. So moving on to the next slide, please, Stuart. It might interest you to know that Europe is the most advanced in AI use. So you can see in these statistics here, which might surprise you, that the Asian nations, most use, they're actually 3rd. They're behind other areas of the globe. And the US is way behind us. And the UK is the leader in AI use. Just moving on to the next slide, Stuart, please. So to give an overall status report on our profession, we've been slow to adopt, but speeding up. We are still focused on tools, And we are seduced by the shininess of some of those tools, rather than focusing on the overall impact of use and focusing on the tasks that they might help us with. There is increasing concern about entry-level and senior staff roles. What are the graduates we producing who are maybe going into our profession or other professions going to do? Graduate unemployment is rising, and we know that there are pauses in recruitment from organizations like BT, for example, and IBM, because they want to assess how AI can actually help them with their work rather than recruiting. Whether that pause continues is a question for debate. But we also know that at the other end, our lunch as senior practitioners in communications is being eaten by management consultants and technology consultants who are taking on some of the higher level responsibilities for AI governance. And I would, and Stuart would argue that that's our role, because that's often about stakeholders holding universities and colleges to account, and we need to be in there helping set policy and AI governance. And actually, more recent thinking is that actually it's middle managers who are going to be squeezed. Because if you think about it, a lot of middle management roles, so that's practitioners with maybe 5 to 10 years experience, a lot of that is about planning, a lot of that is about monitoring, progress chasing, etc., etc., etc. Those are routine tasks that can be automated by AI very, very well. So we're beginning to see now questions about those middle ranking roles. So that's a challenge for us. Just moving on then, Stuart, to use of actual tools. Just one or two things to say before I move over to Stuart. Not all AI tools are the same. If we think about the ethics of some of these tools, media monitoring, social media monitoring, and influencer identification is very much finding out what is actually the case. So not too many ethical challenges around the use of tools in those areas. But if we think about stakeholder management and monitoring, if we think about e-marketing, if we think about the use of chatbots and automated assistants and content creation, then there are issues around these tools because they influence what can be. And in content creation, we are creating realities. And these things have ethical implications. So when we think about the use of tools, lots of issues there that Stuart will drill down on. But just moving on to the next slide, Stuart, for final thoughts really on overview. We took the use of all these tools in AI-enabled tools, and we applied them to the Global Capability Framework, which is the framework that CIPR uses to scope all public relations work. And it scopes our work under 3 headings. First of all, there is communication work, so work that we do as specialists in communication. Second role that we have is contributions to organizations, which is all about things like reputation management and building and contextual intelligence and facilitating relationships. But there's a whole area of our professional expertise which is around what does it mean to be a professional, and that's around ethics, and it's around offering organizational leadership, and it's about being a trusted advisor. So the tools are all around the outside area of that disc, and you can see in those professional areas that is where AI has least penetrated our profession. And I think this is really interesting. So at this senior level, what organizations want from their PR professionals in HE and in colleges is their strategic expertise and ability to keep the organization safe, that guardian role. Your contemporary knowledge of communication and the wider context in which universities and colleges are operating, your ability to integrate these things thrusts you into a leadership role. Such a role cannot be reduced to a series of tasks. Your ability to integrate insight, your ability to read context, to calibrate organizations, your ability to bring judgment and empathy and the human touch and the understanding of the best and the right thing to do given any situation, all guided by a strong ethical compass, is the realm of the senior practitioner. And the more AI takes over the content generation, which is around our communication expertise, and even around our contribution to organizations in terms of, understanding what stakeholders want, the more we use AI for those things, then the more we need you to take on that governance role. And that is where your expertise can be really valued. Next slide, please, Stuart. So moving quickly on now, some of the practical issues for us then, and there are ethical implications for us at a tactical level, at an overview level, our ability to keep up with developments. And it is a market, I say, with some dark secrets, because we're being driven by organizations that want to make money, is a real challenge for us, and it's an ethical challenge for us. And Stuart will explain more why in a second. Making those choices of which are the best tools that give us efficiency and effectiveness is difficult given the number that are coming out all the time. And we have an ethical responsibility to our organizations to choose the best tools. There are ethical issues in the use of tools themselves. As I mentioned earlier, things like image recognition, digital assistants, recording every conversation that we have, voice tracking. These are tools with lots of ethical issues behind them. And then, students are asking us, what about transparency? When are we using AI? And so are other stakeholders. What are universities doing to develop AI? And these are challenges that will come to you as people ask the question, answer the questions organizations are being asked about their implementation of AI. And then the whole issue of bias of algorithms, and there's a link there. Anne's going to share the slides with you afterwards. If you click on that link, it takes you to some work done by Bloomberg. And image generation for job ads, for example, shows the bias inherent in these algorithms. Job ads for doctors, 7% of the images are of females. Images of we know that 39% of doctors are women, but generated images by AI, just 7% are women when you ask somebody like Stable Diffusion to generate an ad for you. Strategically, there are questions for us around the governance of organizational, of our own organizational communications. There are issues for us around the commoditization of communication in universities. We're dealing with intelligent people who can use these tools, and the disintermediation of our function while others take over, particularly content creation, is a huge challenge for us, I think. There's a challenge around whether our organizations are data-led or data-informed. The challenge around accountability for AI systems. We've got UCL being taken to court as we speak because of the amount of online teaching that was done through COVID. It's not long before that challenge will come to us all, I'm sure, about the amount of online teaching that is done with students insisting on it so that they can afford to take jobs to pay for their education. And then we've got this trust deficit to address. Final slide from me before passing over to Stuart, if you could just move on, Stuart. So I think the key questions for us about the oversight of the digital practice of the communication area, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. There's a whole area for us about advice on organizational governance, right up to Senate level and to governing body level, and who is there making the decisions about AI within our academic institutions. There's a whole thing about the nature of society that we are creating and our responsibility to students and in education land to address that issue, and the sorts of organizations we are creating, not only the sorts of universities that we are creating, but the sorts of jobs and organizations that our students will be creating into the future. And in some, really, there are questions about what goes into AI, what comes out of AI, and the types of systemic changes that we are producing as academic institutions in societies and in organizations because of our use of AI. So I'm going to hand over to Stuart now. He's going to drill down into some of these issues and offer some practical way forward. So Stuart, over to you.
Thank you for that, Anne. That was a fascinating overview. And yeah, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to delve into some of these issues in a bit more depth. And for some of you might have noticed I just used the word delve. I promise you, even though I used the word delve, these are my words and not written by AI, because delve is infamously one of the words you can look for to see whether copy has been generated by AI, because it's a word that AI overuses. So yeah, I just want to kind of build on what Anne's kind of said and look at kind of what are the things that we as PR professionals need to kind of consider when we're talking about AI. But first, I just wanted to kind of start with this quote from Simon Bohr, who's the chief executive of the Government Communications Service. And he said this in a kind of speech he made to at a GCS conference, kind of think it was about last November. You know, should public sector communicators be using AI at all? Of course we should. You know, that should be the given. And if you actually look at organizations that are really pushing the boundaries of what is possible and looking at the opportunities, then that's what GCS is doing. And I think it's doing it at a sensible pace, in that it recognizes we can't afford to stand still, we can't afford to do nothing. Using AI is inevitable. So therefore, we've got to work out how is the most kind of effective, ethical way to do that. And I think one of the kind of the other really important issues for us to think about is kind of summed up in this quote from Satya Nadella, the chief executive of Microsoft, about people don't need to be an expert in AI itself, but you do need to use it to kind of augment what you do. And I think kind of Anne referred to this when she was talking. And I think the perfect example of this is actually what Microsoft has called their AI product, Copilot, because that is how they envisage you using it. They don't envisage it replacing jobs. They envisage it making you better at your job, making you faster at your job, making you more efficient at your job. And I think one of the other kind of key things there is, you know, to be able to use AI effectively, you actually need to know what you're doing. You know, so for example, there was a really good example of Lord Justice Biss, who is an expert on intellectual property law, and he used AI to write part of a ruling, and he actually spoke about it at a conference and described it as jolly useful. But the point is that he's one of the UK, one of England, Wales's foremost experts on intellectual property law. So he knew what prompt, he knew what question to ask AI, and he knew how to interrogate the results and check it for accuracy. So something that would have taken him half a day took him a few minutes. But that was because he was already an expert. You couldn't ask the same question because you wouldn't be able to know whether the output the AI was giving you was the right one. And there's also another issue here, about whether or not there's actually a responsibility for us as PR professionals to use AI. And Lord Chief Justice Voss, who's the kind of UK, England and Wales' second most senior law lord, made a speech where he talked about the fact that lawyers have got a duty to do their best for clients. So they've got to work in the most effective way possible. They've got to give them the best advice. They've got to give them, do it in a timely manner. And his argument was, because AI helps you to do that, helps you to give that advice, helps you to do it faster, helps you to do it more effectively. If lawyers aren't using AI, then actually they're failing in their ethical duty to clients. And when I kind of read about this speech, it prompted me to do the same thing and to actually take a look and see, what does the CIPR Code of Conduct say? And when we take a look at what the CIPR Code of Conduct says, it says members must deliver work competently, that is, in a cost-effective, appropriate and thoughtful manner. So actually, our own code of conduct gives the same implication of what Lord Justice Voss said, that we actually have an ethical duty to be using AI to make ourselves more effective practitioners. But one of the other kind of issues that we need to think about, if we accept that and we understand that, is, what does that actually mean? And Anne started to talk about this, because for me, there are two really important elements. There's the one that we all get bogged down in and we keep talking about, which is the role of AI in kind of comms and public relations. And that's all about tasks. That's all about workflow. That's all about the tools we can use in our day-to-day job. And that's absolutely vital. And that's where a lot of the focus of the work that the GCS is doing. It's where a lot of the focus of the work that we're doing with clients is. We go in and we do an audit of how the team works. We look at what different individuals do on a day-to-day basis. We look at what their objectives are, what tasks they do, and we identify where AI can have the most impact and where it should be used and shouldn't be used. But that's only half the story. The other half of that story is what the reputational impact of AI on the organization is going to be. How are you using AI? And and when you're putting your policy in place, there's lots and lots of tools you can use. But one of the really interesting ones is something called the Alethea framework that was developed by Rolls-Royce. And it was actually published before all the hype about ChatGPT. I think it was a couple of years before that. And what the Alethea framework is it's an open source toolkit to help you to develop an ethical AI policy. And you might kind of think, well, why did Rolls-Royce publish this? Well, the simple answer is they've been using AI for years and years to do things like assessing the safety of aircraft engines. Now, that's critical. Lives are literally at stake. So therefore, they have to use AI ethically. So they already had years and years of doing this. And the toolkit they've created is open source, so anybody can use it. And since they published it, it's been used by the music industry, by the healthcare industry, by the PR and comms sector, because we've used it on behalf of clients to help to think about, frame how we think about policies. So that kind of whole thing about the reputational impact of AI on the organization isn't just about how the PR and comms team uses it, but it's how the whole company, the whole organization approaches it. And kind of referenced at universities, it might be doing things like sifting student applications. It might be how it's being used for grant applications. And it's not saying we shouldn't do these things or that we should do these things. It's that we actually need to think about what the implications are for doing so and go into it with our kind of eyes wide open. And I think when you put that policy in place, one of the key things, and we find this kind of time and time again when we go into organizations, is the people that are being asked to look at putting a policy in place, too often it's technology-led. It's sitting with kind of IT, and this is not a technology issue. This is a people issue. So therefore, it's absolutely critical that we, as senior kind of public relations practitioners, are in that room helping to shape what that policy is. And the other side of that is that because of people changing behavior, You know, historically, people would form a view of an organization or a product or a brand, you know, by what they read in the media. And then they started, you know, then search engine optimization became the thing because people would search, and that's what formed your reputation. Increasingly, what we're going to be seeing is that AI is going to become the world's biggest reputation management engine, because that's what people are using to ask questions. And unlike a search engine where you get a list of things, what AI is doing is amalgamating different sources and giving you an answer. So we've really got to think as kind of public relations practitioners is how do we influence what that answer is? You know, how, you know, is there a way we can? Because one of the issues we have is that large language models are opaque. You know, because of the very nature of how they're designed, nobody, even the people responsible for creating them, can tell you exactly how that they're working. And this is it, and this is something I've been talking about for months, years. And it was quite interesting that recently, Rupert Younger, who heads up the kind of Oxford University Centre for Corporate Reputation, part of Saïd Business School, actually published something on exactly the same lines. And what he argues is that actually we should treat generative AI as another stakeholder, not simply a technology, because actually generative AI is creating content in exactly the same way as journalists do, as politicians make speeches, as think tanks write policy reports. You know, so we need to be thinking about, you know, how do we influence that? And the next issue to kind of think about, yeah, I'm just in here, put some examples of how organizations in the public sector are actually using AI or thinking about using AI. Now, there's operational issues to consider, but there are also reputational ones. And it could well be that somewhere in your university or in your college, you have people who are exploring using AI. You know, it might be the HR team that they're using it to sift applicants, or, you know, and there is a reputational problem waiting to happen if you don't find out what's happening and have that policy in place. And kind of probably the most infamous example on that list is the Department for Work and Pensions, where they were using AI to identify fraudulent claims, benefit claims, and they had to actually withdraw it because it was throwing up false positives. It was identifying fraudulent claims that weren't. But there's no point in you actually just writing a policy and kind of having it sitting there on the shelf. Because if I was to ask you all now, have you read all of your organization's policies? Do you know what they say? I don't think very many hands would go up because people don't read them. So you've got to kind of accompany that with actually culture change. That means holding people's hands, that means training, that means support. And there's even an argument that AI training is compulsory, because kind of Anne mentioned that legislation is beginning to come through. Well, Article 4 of the EU AI Act says that organizations have got to ensure to a kind of best of their extent that their staff using AI are AI literate. I'm kind of paraphrasing. So actually, there's potentially a legal obligation. And we're kind of running this webinar now as the King's speech is happening. You know, we know that there is going to be an AI bill in the King's speech. What we don't know is the detail of what's going to be in there. And obviously, when the first kind of papers are published, there will be an opportunity for us to lobby and to shape them. But it wouldn't surprise me that if some of the things that are in that EU bill are appearing in what we're doing in the UK. And I got ahead of myself on that one because I forgot I'd put in a slide in for the King's speech. But one of the other kind of dangers that we see all the time with clients is if you don't have that policy in place and you don't have that training program in place, that things are happening around you. And there's some really interesting data from Salesforce. And this was kind of research from last year, but I suspect it hasn't changed that much. And it basically showed that 55% of people, this is globally, were using unapproved generative AI tools at work. More staggeringly, 40% were using banned tools. And that's because it's so easy. You know, just because, you know, you might block them on the kind of your company's internet system, but everybody's got their own mobile. You know, they can sit there and they can use it. They can upload confidential information if they want to. It's virtually impossible for you as an organization to stop members of your team from doing that. And actually, if you look at the figures on training, it's not really surprising. If people haven't had that support and training, then it's no wonder they're not doing it right, and they're not following the rules, they're not following the guidance and the policy. And I think that's one, you know, and just very crudely, because one of the things Anne kind of talked about right at the start is about kind of some of the risks associated with kind of using AI tools. And I think one of the fascinating things there is it's changing. So when ChatGPT first came out, there were all these scare stories about people like Samsung, where they were uploading, some of their engineers were uploading confidential material into ChatGPT, and it was being kind of sucked in to its large language model. And that was a real risk. And lots of people have now got that in their head as that's what the risk is. And if you're using free tools, the free version of ChatGPT, the free version of Copilot, that's absolutely true. If you're using paid business enterprise versions, it isn't. You know, if you actually read and delve into your license, you know, you can safely put your confidential information in there. You know, if you looked at something like Copilot, it's no different to saving. You know, the reality is it's a bit like saving your files on kind of on SharePoint on the kind of Microsoft cloud, but you've got to be crystal clear which version of the tool you're using, because they have the same name, but they have different licensing terms. And I just want to kind of touch on some of the kind of the other kind of ethical issues that Anne raised, and kind of delve, there's that delve word again, delve into them a little bit more again. So one of the things I often talk about is kind of the ABCs of AI. And the first, you know, so we've got accuracy. You know, can you trust what it's saying? We've got the whole issue around bias, copyright, some of the dangers associated with it. You know, so on accuracy, you know, there's a fairly simple rule that you should follow. The Chicago School of Journalism has this wonderful phrase: if your mother says she loves you, check it out. We could quite easily replace that. If your artificial intelligence says it loves you, check it out. So everything that kind of comes out, you need to have that human touch, you know, the human still needed to make sure that it's accurate. Copyright. Oh, we could run an entire session on this, but I just want to kind of touch on some of the issues briefly, because it's at the moment, one of the kind of challenges we have is that intellectual property law, copyright law, hasn't kept up, can't keep up with what's happening in AI. And I think probably one of the most interesting perspectives I heard on this is when I was in Washington, DC last year at the Provoke Global Summit. And one of the speakers was Nick Thompson, who's the CEO of the Atlantic. And he used this brilliant analogy that if people went into a library, somebody went into a library and they read every single back issue of the Atlantic, and they even copied a few pages, and they used that to write their own article based on what they'd learned, he'd be delighted. That's exactly what he wants people to do at the Atlantic, for it to be this authoritative source of thinking and knowledge and facts. Now, he then caveated it and saying, okay, so I'm happy for my content to be ingested into the large language model, but we need to have some way of remunerating publishers, because moving forward, we need to be able to keep creating great content. And it's quite interesting that since he kind of made that speech in DC, the Atlantic has now signed a deal with OpenAI to be paid and remunerated for the content that OpenAI is using. And I think potentially that's the way forward. The other side of that is content you create with AI, and who owns the copyright to that. And the jury is very much out. So in the US, it's quite clear. If content is generated entirely by AI, you do not own the content, even if you wrote the prompt. In the UK, until we see some case law, it's much harder to give a definitive answer to that. You probably own the content is probably the safest way to phrase it, but caveat, not a lawyer. And kind of coming to kind of the close of what I'm saying now, because I do want to kind of leave a little bit of time for Q&As, is it was quite interesting that last week, the Institute of Internal Communications published some research. And one of the ones they had in there is that 1/3 of employees said they wouldn't trust kind of content from their CEO that had been developed with AI. And my immediate thought on that is, well, do these employees know that most content they see from their CEO is probably developed by the internal comms team? It's not actually written by the CEO anyway. And I kind of tweeted something to that effect. And it was quite amusing that literally kind of within the same kind of 20 minutes of me tweeting that, Steve Shepperson Smith, kind of the former chair, the former president of the CIPR, made exactly the same point. So sometimes our fear of AI is a bit irrational, because actually, if the CEOs just help, if AI is just being used to help create some content, but it's still the voice of the CEO, it is still checked, it is still approved, and it's not like 100%. And also the transparency thing, because if we go on, the Warsaw Principles that were published in October last year by ECO about the ethical use of AI in communications. So we've had the things like bias, we've got the accuracy and fact checking in there, but right up at the front is transparency and disclosure. But even that raises questions, transparency and disclosure about what? If you use AI to generate some ideas, but then you write something off the back of it, do you need to disclose that? If you use AI to do the first draft of an article, but then you change 90% of it, do you need to disclose that? 60%, 70%, 50%? Where's the threshold? At what point do we or don't we kind of declare the use of AI? And I think this is a kind of moving field at the moment. And kind of final slide is just looking at, okay, so what should our next steps be? And I think kind of Anne's going to kind of come in as well at this point. I think the first step is doing exactly what we're doing now. We're learning. You've got to kind of keep learning about this, understanding the basics. That might mean you do an in-house workshop for your team, so everybody's on the same place. One of the big ones for me is experiment. Use your personal accounts, not your professional ones, to experiment with some of the free tools, just so you can get a feel for them. So when you actually come to use them professionally, you understand some of the nuances. It's not all new to you. Audit, the example I gave of kind of looking at what the team does and finding out where kind of AI can be best used and where shouldn't it be used. You absolutely need that policy in place. And so many organizations at the moment don't have it. And keep experimenting. And do you wanted to add?
Well, I'll just say one thing, Stuart, because I think we're running out of time. We need to give some time for questions. It's just on the experiment bit, use the ones with least risk first. Get used to it, and then develop a game plan for yourself about. And the audit bit is, look at all the stuff that takes all your time, that's repetitive and grunt work, and think about task, not tools. So social media monitoring is an obvious one. It takes a lot of time, can be very easily more automated, and you can get lots of proprietary AI tools for that. So think, first of all, what are the ones that are least ethical risk, and then develop a game plan.
Brilliant.
So last slide from us, really. Resistance is futile. The age of AI is here. It's going to impact our work at every level. We need to engage with it. Don't be afraid of it. And most of all, we need to show leadership on it in our own places of work. Otherwise, the IT guys will grab it, or the management consultants, and we certainly don't want that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to kind of throw in a last little joker. So after I had my meeting with Anne yesterday, I thought, actually, wouldn't it be quite interesting if we developed an AI tool that could answer your ethical questions about using AI for communications? And Anne's published papers for the CIPR. My own company's done work on this. So I created this little tool where if you go to it, and we can share the link, it's basically an AI bot where you can ask questions about the ethical use of AI for PR and communications, and its answers, it's knowledge-based, kind of all of the papers that the CIPR's published on AI and ethics, along with some of the stuff that I've published. It is a work in progress. I literally kind of created it in an hour or so, after my meeting with Anne yesterday, but I just thought it might be a fun thing for people to play with. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and then we can do the kind of some quick Q&As.
Thank you both. That was absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to try out the tool that you've created. It looks very interesting. We are running out of time. We've got 4 that I can see quick questions, so I shall rattle through them and give you a bit of time to answer each one. So the first one says, the content creation part is what concerns me the most, since the AI generates stereotypical output that are by far as biased as the data entered by all individuals in the world. How does UK, being the lead in AI application, monitor and control the ethical and professional use of AI tools? And are there sectors that do not AI content that do not use AI content creation or keep such usage highly restrictive?
So I'll just say one thing and then hand over to Stuart. You will all have your diversity, equity and inclusion policies, and you need to bear those in mind when you're using any AI tool. I showed you the Bloomberg example of 7% of images for AI generated job ads of doctors are female, 39% in the profession are female. So you have to bear in mind all the time there is inbuilt biases, because these algorithms have been built by human beings, and they bring all their prejudice and hidden bias blindness with them. They're not normally malign in their intent. Well, some are, but not most who want to generate good content, but it's there, and it's a reflection of human life.
Thank you. Stuart, do you want to add to that, or should I move on to the next one?
Yeah, no, I'll add very quickly is, yeah, so bias is in there, but you can actually flip that on its head, because human beings are biased. We're biased. We all have unconscious bias. And it is quite interesting to actually ask AI to check for unconscious bias, because it might be biased, but it can also do that, because actually it's got access to diversity and inclusion policies. And you can even kind of, upload yours, so it's checking it against your policy. So it's not as, you can flip that on its head.
Thank you. That was brilliant. And the next one refers back to what you talked about generative AI being recognised as a stakeholder. And I said that's very interesting. From your point of view, what would be the main drawback for considering such a concept?
I don't think it's about kind of main drawbacks, because it's more that it's a reality, is that people are forming their opinions about your organization. So therefore, whether you call it a stakeholder or not, people are going to form opinions about you because of AI. So therefore, we've got to be thinking, how can we influence AI in order that those, opinions are accurate? Now, the big question is how you do that, because at the moment, there are people like us researching it and exploring it, but you don't have those definitive answers.
And it's not unusual to have an inanimate thing as a stakeholder. For several years now, the environment has been regarded as a stakeholder in decision-making in organizations. So the fact that reputation AI should be one of those inanimate stakeholders makes absolute sense.
Thank you. And then we've got another one where another question that says, obviously, great session, lots to reflect on. On a day-to-day basis, what AI tools would you recommend for A, media coverage monitoring, and B, identifying influencers on social media?
Okay, so I'll kind of jump into that. I wouldn't, in that you actually need a lot more detail about what those things mean in order to be able to kind of provide a proper answer. But just kind of use the first one quickly about monitoring. You have tools out there like NewsWhip, which isn't strictly a monitoring tool, but it is a predictive analytics tool. So if it picks up a news story or a piece of social content, it can predict how likely that content is to go viral. So therefore, if you're doing something like issues management, it gives you, whether or not you need to intervene or whether you can ignore it. but also it can show you actually if there were issues emerging, is it something that you might want to be commenting on and developing content on and developing expertise on? So that's kind of one example.
Thank you. Simon has asked if you'd put the QR code back up again because it had disappeared before you managed to capture it. I know we are going to send the slides out with the recording as well, Simon, so just in case we don't get to do that, you will get the QR code with the slides. There was a couple, just very quickly, I'm just trying to cover everybody. There was a couple in the chat that weren't in the Q&A. 1 second. Oh, thank you for that, Stuart. In the chat, one that made me smile very much because it was probably my approach to this a couple of months ago. Dom said, I can't live without AI now in my daily working life, but my wife who works at Leeds Uni in a student engagement role, a PR grad herself, feels like it's cheating. It's passing off work as her own, etc. What advice would you give to her and others who are of a certain age and are proud but perhaps in denial?
Well, the first thing I would say about that is it's quite that certain age thing is quite interesting because I have a teenage daughter who's doing A-levels at the moment, and contrary to popular belief, she is adamantly opposed to using AI to create content or to write her essays, to such an extent that I'm having to persuade her to use AI in what I consider to be ethical ways. And to give you an example of that, she's absolutely right to not want to use it to write essays or do her own work. But an interesting use is to use AI as a virtual lecturer. So if she's going to write a politics essay, she can actually have a discussion with the lecturer about the topic first and use the discussion, and that lecturer is AI, and use what she kind of discovers and her arguments to write a better essay. And that kind of whole disclosure thing, it goes back to how much are you using it. You know, it's you can't give a definitive. If 80, 100%, then absolutely disclose it. If you've used it to help you to do a better job, I would say you probably don't need to. It's that human still needed element.
I think there's also an aspect of just start with the simple stuff. So if you're if your wife's involved in interviewing students, Dom, then she could record those using an AI assistant and share it with them, so that there's no ethical issue there. If she's sharing automatically everything that she's got, and just gradually build up her confidence, and use those tools that have very few ethical issues embedded within them. But it's the fear of the unknown, a lot of this, isn't it? So a little bit of hand-holding and just start with the simple stuff. The ones that have very little ethical risk would be my suggestion on that.
I promise this is the last two very quick questions because I know we've run over, but there's so much interest, so thank you very much. In the education sector, are there any banned generative AI tools that you're aware of?
Well, certainly there are institutional policies, and I belong to an institution that has, let's say, behind leading edge permissions for use of AI tools. There's a lot of them, and I can't understand some of them. So typically, for example, the use of Fireflies or Otter for recording meetings, and we know in higher institution, we took away meetings, 90% of our jobs would go. It's a really, really helpful and time-saving tool. And I know that some institutions won't allow that. And so there's always the fear in higher education, I think, of the risk of these tools. And you've got to remember that we are networked into, systems like Janet and Huge, access to government systems. So quite reasonably, universities and colleges are cautious about allowing access of AI tools to systems that they think are sensitive, hold lots of confidential information, and are prone to hacking, because a number of HE institutions have been hacked. So I can understand their caution, but it is frustrating.
Thank you.
I'd actually flip the question on its head And for us, a lot of the work we do with clients, both in the public sector and the private sector, the AI solutions that we're recommending are Microsoft. Not necessarily because they're better, but because it is much easier to get them through those regulatory hoops. Because in reality, actually, the permissions are already there. They might just not be using them. And given that the technical differences between tools are so slim, that's often the best route to take. So a lot of the work we're doing is with Copilot, and I think that's just going to grow.
Thank you. And this is very much the last one, I promise. What are your thoughts on developing a PR GPT specifically for an organisation's PR team? And additionally, what are the top 3 ethical points you recommend to ensure that it's responsible and ethical use?
I think one of the big challenges is what do you pull in it? I mean, we do so much, don't we? And just practically, how would you build such a tool? It could be done, I'm sure, by, you know, tapping into every PR practitioner around the globe and collecting information about all their work. But I think it would be a deeply challenging build. And a lot of our work is very situational specific. So there are real practical challenges there. Stuart knows more about this, but I know, for example, with the Government Communication Service, they did think about building their own large language model at one stage, particularly around, for example, planning campaigns. But actually, when they did the work and investigating it, they found that there were already really good planning tools and some of their own planning materials out there in the public domain was available and being used by others. So 2 challenges on that. One is just the variety of the practice globally, because we'd have to do it globally. And the fact is that a lot of material there, a lot of the stuff that we use as a matter of course, the blueprint stuff, if you like, is already in existence.
Yeah, I agree with everything I've just said there. Kind of a couple of quick points to add. Creating a custom GPTs is absolutely a really good thing for in-house teams to do, but they would be quite niche. They'd be to do something specific. So it wouldn't be kind of an all-embracing, all-encompassing one, because that would just be too challenging. The second part of that is there are actually companies out there at the moment developing specific tools for the PR sector. You know, so for example, we're working with one where it basically can ingest all, and it is all confidential, it's all secure. It can ingest all of your kind of corporate documents and information that you want to share with it. And it can be used to kind of help draft statements for issues management. Recently, it was used, because it's still in kind of beta test mode, it was used at the AGM of a really big global company to answer questions in real time. So as questions were coming in both online and in the room from shareholders and stakeholders, they were able to use this AI tool to provide near instant answers, because they had a team of people in the back room with the tool. They were asking it the question, the tool was drafting the answer, a human being was checking it and approving it, and kind of really quickly they were kind of pumping up those results, which historically would have taken much longer. It would have been something they would have done after the event, not kind of during and immediately after.
So specific use is the key, isn't it, Stuart? Yeah.
Yeah. If you're developing your own, they're going to be really niche, or using kind of third-party ones that people have invested time in.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for staying on and answering everybody's questions. Back over to you, Anne.
Yes, well, big thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Right, great big thank you. If there's one takeaway, and there's loads of them, one takeaway I think is that whether you're an organisation or an individual, you must actually develop a policy on how to use AI, and this should not be done by the IT department. It should be definitely sit within, you know, the realms of PR. So big thank you both to Stuart and Anne. Reminder next week that we have James Robertson from Weber Shandwick, who at the same time next week from 12 to 1, and he's going to be actually showing you and demonstrating some practical tools that you can use. So I think that's going to be a great session. But huge thank you to Anne and Stuart, and hope to see some of you again next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.